So I'm here to talk with you about a project that you've been working on for a little while. It's done now. It's something that you've been wanting to do for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I've been talking with you about things, and this has come up a number of times just in the last few years.
Yeah.
So the title of this project is
Waiting, Dating, and Mating.
So there's our title, Waiting, Dating, and Mating, which is clearly about just about relationships.
Yep.
Specifically relationships that lead to marriage and physical relations.
Yep.
And love.
Mm-hmm.
and all those things. So what is it about this topic that made you say, you know what, I need to do a book about this?
Well,
and then we'll get to what kind of book, because this isn't some sort of nonfiction chapter book. It's a comic book that you've done. So,
well, so purity and this whole subject of marriage and dating and all that, it really hits close to home for me, because when I was a teenager, I failed miserably in this area of my life. And ever since I really got, my life right with Christ, and He's helped me through so much of this stuff and to repent and turn things completely around, and seeing how much failing in this area has negatively impacted my life, and I've had to do a lot of reprogramming. It's really just been a huge hindrance, and so I've always wanted to help students and adolescents get through those years, avoiding those same mistakes that I made.
So what message and what topics are people going to see as they're reading this book?
Well, I'm really trying to address the topic of sexuality and the topic of purity in a way that is going to be palatable for middle schoolers and high schoolers. It's going to be in a non-graphic way. Mm-hmm. This is for people who already know the nitty-gritty details, but it's more about the heart of what God has designed sexuality for, what God has to say about it, and what it means when we distort that or go against God's plan for that. And so that's really the heart of the book. It's about God's heart. And then we talk about biblical commandments. We talk about biblical principles, which aren't necessarily commands, but through a bunch of different verses and context, you can pull together a meaning, what God's trying to say. And then just friendly advice from Christians, from me personally, and different things that I learned that really helped me get out of some bad spots. And we talk about some specific things we talk about in there are technology and how that can affect us specifically pornography. We define that term, and just so people can stay away from it,
That's really interesting to me as a parent, because I shouldn't say interesting, but the topic itself is something that pornography now is not something you go out and sneak and get. It comes right into your house.
Yep.
And sometimes it comes in without asking.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't like a vampire where it has to ask to enter. It just goes in, and it's just showing up on your computer sometimes without you even knowing that there was a risk for that to happen.
Yep.
And and so it's something, this whole topic, what's good about this topic, and what's good about any kind of project like this, is that it's sometimes a topic that just doesn't get talked about. And maybe because it's embarrassing, or maybe because it's something that I'm not equipped to talk about it.
Right.
And when I say that, I mean primarily as far as parents with kids, kids with kids even, to talk about the positives and to actually talk about these topics, to say, I've struggled with this, or this isn't right,
Mm-hmm.
And so that also comes out of not just me as a parent, but me as a children's pastor, as I'm, talking about this with parents, and it's younger and younger, the kids are getting exposed to stuff like this, and so to prepare them, not necessarily to tell them all the details, but to prepare them,
right,
to say, this might come your way, what do you do?
That's exactly what we try to do in the book, and try to make it scary. because it is, because it's something that needs to be. We need to, recoil from it.
It's scary and it's insidious. I mean, it's evil.
Yeah.
And it's a in all senses of the word a perversion of what's good and what was created for good.
Yeah. We also talk about modesty, but it's very general in concept. We tried very, very hard, because this is something that could sneak in. Tried very, very hard to stay away from legalism in anything with this topic. Like, not just modesty, but the whole thing.
Well, and modesty is a hot button topic.
Yes,
where
absolutely.
There's a lot of different viewpoints on it, and it's interesting because I see a lot of different viewpoints on it, and a lot of them are right, even when they're not the same.
Right, right.
Because you're looking at it from different angles and from different perspectives and about different parts of that.
Right. And a big thing we talk about in there is getting an accountability partner, whether or not that's a parent or a person at church or just an older Christian person in your life. Super important. So we hit home on that several times in the book.
I love the comic book format. I love the comic book medium. I've done a lot of work in that medium. In fact, most of my creative work has been done in that. And you and I both, I mean, just from some of the things you can see, just even where we're sitting here in your house, you're a comic book fan.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So, as far as do you like comics, sure, that's an easy answer. Well, why would you use this format to tell this message? But let's go deeper than that then. Why this format beyond just, hey, I like comics because they're cool?
Right. Well, like I said, I struggled with this issue, and so endeavoring to get out of that, I read a lot of books, like chapter books and stuff, and they were helpful, but it just didn't, I've always engaged more with visual stuff, and it's very hard to tell a story or to give a message about sexual purity visually that is going to have positive effects on people, Mm-hmm. And so I've always wanted to produce something like that. As far as I know, there's not been anything like that out there. And I wanted to do that. And like we said, I love comic books. I learned so much from them, just if you're talking about vocabulary growing up, comic books incredibly.
Yeah, I cut my teeth reading on comic books.
Yeah.
That was a big part of just learning to read.
I mean, and I'm a terrible science student, but comic books help clear some of that stuff up for me too,
Well, and Shakespeare too. Like, I actually got more out of Shakespeare when I read a comic book that was an adaptation. But
nice.
But then also there's been a number of comic books throughout my life that had spiritual meaning with them. That it was one thing to read it, it's another thing to see it.
Mm-hmm. So Ben, you are a father of teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
lots of them.
Four right now.
Four of them, yes. And so what would you be looking for in a resource to help them through this topic?
Well, I'd be looking for something that I can agree with the content of it. I also would be looking for something that would be accessible for them. Because, there's resources out there for parents, and then there's resources out there for kids, and there's a few resources out there that's for both at the same time. But if it's going to if it's a resource for the actual teen, then it has to be accessible. It has to be something that as you're reading it resonates with them, and it doesn't talk down to them, but at the same time doesn't talk above them.
Now you've seen the comic,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think this would be something that would be beneficial?
Yeah, I do. I don't know if it would be beneficial for all of my kids.
Right.
But that's just a personality thing, where they all kind of like comics, but then a couple of them really like comics, and so that's where I think the dividing line would be, is this format something that's already something I like or not? I do find that on some of my own projects, you have kids who are, they don't want to read, they don't like to read, but they'll sit down with a comic book, and even if they don't have a lot of experience with comics or aren't like a comic book fan,
right?
They'll go ahead and say, "Oh, I'm going to read this," and the other thing I found is for parents and grandparents and that sort of thing is that they really love getting a comic book or something like that because they'll have a kid that's already into comics, you know. And that's the interesting thing. I mean, what's interesting about this topic in this comic book visual medium is that comic books tend toward objectifying the female form and the male form. And so that's where this is one of those kind of interesting things where this is kind of sneaking in and saying, yeah, we're using the visual format, but we're doing it to actually talk about some of the problems that's over there with the other comic books, you know, as far as just objectifying women and the idealized form, objectifying men and the idealized form, and what usually ends up coming out with comic books is just a very sexualized thing, and this is actually speaking to that. So where can people find it? What do you want people to know about how to get their hands on this thing?
You're going to find it at you can find it at my website, evandavidproductions.com, and if you go to the comic section, there'll be a link there for Waiting, Dating, and Mating, and you can get it. And I'd love if you're a parent or grandparent and you think your child needs this, that'd be awesome. I think it would be helpful. If you're a student and you think, hey, you know, I could use some extra tips and tricks to help me because I want to make sure that I'm living the way God wants me to, I think this would be for you as well. If you're a youth pastor or a pastor, and this could be a cool resource for your youth group, I hope and pray that all those things will happen with this book. And I just really, like, the reason I put it out there is because I want the message to get to people. And so hopefully that'll happen.
Waiting, Dating, and Mating. Thanks for watching. Godspeed.